She believed she was fighting alone, using her art to fund her treatment. But when the vice president walked by, everything shifted in ways she could never have imagined. The wind carried the scent of damp earth as the late afternoon sun cast its golden glow over Goodale Park in Columbus, Ohio. The usual hum of joggers, dog walkers, and families filled the air, but amidst the weekend bustle, a small wooden table stood out. On it lay a collection of watercolor paintings, vivid bursts of color, soft edges blending together, each piece whispering a story of hope and resilience. Behind the table sat a young girl, her frame delicate yet unwavering, her hands, smudged with blue and red, moved with careful precision as she arranged her work. She had been there every weekend, rain or shine, offering her art to strangers with a quiet, determined smile. Her name was Madison. She was 12 years old, and she was fighting for her life. The diagnosis had come 6 months ago, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The word itself felt like an avalanche, burying her family under a crushing weight of fear and hospital bills. The treatments drained not just their finances, but their energy and hope. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Not nearly enough. That was when Madison decided to do something. She had always loved to paint, ever since she could grip a brush with her tiny fingers. She turned blank pages into worlds of color. At first, she painted just to escape. The sterile walls of the hospital room disappeared when she dipped her brush into a swirl of blue. The beeping machines faded when she traced the soft curve of a sunrise. But then she had an idea. What if I sell my paintings? She had asked her mother one evening. Even just a little money could help. Her mother hesitated, knowing how exhausted her daughter already was, but she also saw the light in Madison's eyes, the need to fight, to contribute, to feel like she had some control over what was happening to her body. So, they made it happen. Every weekend, Madison and her mother set up the table in the park. At first, people walked by, offering polite nods or small smiles. But soon, curiosity turned into something more. A few stopped, drawn in by the raw emotion in her work. Then more. Some simply admired the paintings, others purchased them, leaving behind words of encouragement or quiet donations. "Did you paint this one?" an elderly woman asked one day, pointing to a piece depicting a lone tree against a stormy sky. Madison nodded. "Yeah, it's about standing strong even when things get really hard." The woman blinked rapidly, then pulled out her wallet. But not everyone understood. Some assumed it was a school project. Others questioned if the paintings were really hers. One man scoffed, shaking his head. "Cancer? A little dramatic, don't you think?" Madison's mother stiffened, but her daughter simply lifted her chin. She had heard worse, from the whispers at school, from kids who didn't understand why her hair was gone or why she missed so many days. She refused to let it shake her. But that afternoon, something happened that neither she nor her mother could have ever expected. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky when a black SUV pulled up along the curb. The door opened, and for a moment, Madison didn't pay much attention. She was focused on a brushstroke, deepening the orange hues of a sunset she had been working on. But then murmurs rose from the crowd. A few people turned, their eyes widening. She glanced up and saw a man stepping out, his tall frame moving with an air of purpose. He wasn't dressed like the businessmen who sometimes wandered through the park, no stiff suit, no distant expression. He wore a navy blue jacket, hands tucked into his pockets, his gaze scanning the scene with quiet curiosity. Madison didn't recognize him right away. Her mother did. "Madison," she whispered, leaning in. "That's J.D. Vance." The name sounded familiar. Her mother had mentioned him before, a politician, the vice president, someone important, someone whose face had been on the news. But at that moment, he was just another person walking through the park. And then he stopped, right in front of her table. Madison wiped her fingers on the edge of her sweatshirt, unsure of what to say. She was used to speaking with strangers, but this felt different. He was looking at her paintings, not just glancing, but really looking. His eyes lingered on each one, moving from the soft pastels of a meadow to the deep blues of an ocean wave. Then he picked up a small canvas near the edge of the table, the Phoenix. She had painted it late one night, unable to sleep after a particularly painful treatment. The bird's wings stretched wide, bursting with gold and crimson, rising from a bed of smoldering ash. It was her favorite piece, and she almost hadn't brought it. "Is this yours?" Vance asked, turning the painting slightly in his hands. Madison nodded. "Yeah." He studied it for a long moment, then glanced at her. "Tell me about it." She swallowed, glancing at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod. "It's about getting back up," she said, "even when you feel like everything's falling apart." His expression changed just slightly, but she caught it, like something had struck a chord. "My grandma used to say something similar," he murmured, "that you don't let the world decide when you're finished. You decide that for yourself." Madison nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. For a few seconds, there was silence. The noise of the park faded into the background. A small crowd had gathered, curious about the interaction, but Madison barely noticed. Then Vance turned to her mother. "How much for the painting?" Her mother hesitated. Madison had priced it at $40, but something about the way he asked made it feel like money wasn't the point. Before her mother could answer, Madison spoke up. "I was asking for 40, she said. "But really, whatever you think is fair." Something flickered across his face, something close to admiration. Vance reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He set it on the table, but before Madison could react, he added another, and another. Then, without a word, he turned to a security detail, motioning for one of them. The man stepped forward and Vance spoke quietly. Madison couldn't hear what he said, but a moment later the agent nodded and stepped away, pulling out his phone. Madison looked at her mother, who was frozen in place, her hands clutched together. Something was happening, and whatever it was bigger than a painting. Madison sat there, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, her mind racing. Something was happening, something she couldn't quite put into words. J.D. Vance had paid for her painting, but that wasn't what made her heart pound. It was the way he had looked at her, like he understood something deeper, like her struggle wasn't just a story on a canvas. Her mother was still staring at the money on the table, her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Then the security agent returned. He leaned toward Vance and spoke in a hushed tone. Vance nodded, his expression unreadable. "Madison," he said, turning back to her, "you've got quite a talent. And more than that, you've got fight." She swallowed, not sure how to respond. He glanced at her mother. "Do you mind if I ask, how's the fundraising going?" Madison's mother shifted on her feet. "We're doing what we can." She hesitated, then exhaled. "But it's hard. The treatments, the hospital stays, it adds up faster than we can keep up." Vance nodded like he'd expected that answer. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down. He wasn't rushing, wasn't in a hurry to leave. He leaned in slightly, resting his arms on the table, as if he was just another person in the park having a conversation. "Tell me something," he said, looking at Madison again. "What's the hardest part?" She blinked. No one had asked her that before, not like that. Most people just said things like, "You're so strong," or "You're going to beat this." They meant well, but they didn't really want to know what it felt like. She glanced down at her hands, at the blue paint smudged against her skin. "The tiredness," she said finally. "Not just from the chemo, but from feeling like I have to keep proving I'm more than this." Vance tilted his head slightly. "More than the diagnosis?" She nodded. The words were out before she could stop them. Sometimes people look at me and all they see is a sick kid, like I'm already halfway gone. She hesitated, then added, I just want to be me. I want to paint. I want to have normal conversations that aren't about hospitals and treatments and whether or not I'll make it to my next birthday. Her mother wiped at the corner of her eye. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. Just a little. I get that, he said, more than you probably think. Something in his voice made her believe him. But before she could ask what he meant, he shifted back slightly, glancing at his security agent again. The man gave him a small nod. Vance turned back to Madison and her mother. I'd like to help. Madison's mother straightened. You already have. The painting. I mean really help. Something in his tone made Madison's stomach flip. Vance reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He slid it across the table. Madison's mother hesitated, then picked it up. Her eyes scanned the page, and her breath hitched. What is this? She whispered. Madison leaned over to look. The words didn't make sense at first, but then they clicked. It was confirmation of a donation large enough to cover her entire treatment, every appointment, every hospital stay, every last bill, paid in full. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Madison's chest tightened. She shook her head. I don't understand. Vance smiled again, softer this time. You don't have to. Just know that sometimes the world gives back to people who refuse to give up. Madison couldn't breathe. And in that moment, everything changed. The world around them felt distant, like the hum of the park had faded into the background. Madison's mother clutched the paper with trembling fingers, her lips slightly parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. Madison, on the other hand, could only stare at J.D. Vance. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. People had stopped by her table before, buying her paintings, offering words of encouragement. But no one had done something like this. Vance must have noticed the disbelief in her eyes because he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. I know this might feel overwhelming, he said, his voice calm, steady. But you deserve a fighting chance. And if what I can give makes that fight a little easier, then it's worth it. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it. Her chest felt tight, but not in the way it did after a round of chemo. This was different. But why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Vance studied her for a moment, then exhaled through his nose. Because I've seen what it's like when people fight and don't get the help they need. My mom, she struggled a lot when I was a kid. Life wasn't easy and there were times when I didn't know if we'd make it. He paused, his fingers tapping lightly against the wooden table. But there were people who stepped in, who helped, and I never forgot that. Madison swallowed. She had read stories before about people who came from nothing, who had to fight for every inch of their future. She understood that fight in a way most kids her age didn't. Still, she shook her head. But I didn't do anything special. Vance smiled, but there was something knowing in his eyes. Didn't you? He picked up the Phoenix painting again, holding it carefully. You took something painful and turned it into this. You didn't just sit back and let life happen to you. You made something. And people feel that. I felt that. He set the painting down gently. That's rare, Madison. Her throat felt tight. She could hear her mother sniffling quietly beside her. She had never thought of it like that. For months, it felt like she was just trying to keep her head above water, doing what she could to help her family in a situation that felt impossible. But now, looking at the man sitting across from her, she realized someone had noticed. Someone had seen her. Vance checked his watch, then let out a small sigh. I wish I could stay longer, but I have another engagement I can't miss. Madison didn't want him to go, not because he was the vice president, not because of the donation, but because for the first time in a long time, she felt like someone understood. She took a deep breath. "Will you, keep the painting?" Vance's brow furrowed for a second, then softened. "Of course. It's one of the most meaningful things I've ever bought." Madison reached for her paintbrush, dipping it into a thin pool of gold paint. She carefully added a small signature in the bottom corner of the canvas. Then, next to it, she wrote, "Keep fighting." She slid the painting back toward him. "Now it's finished." Vance looked at the words for a long moment, then nodded. He stood, tucking the canvas securely under his arm. "I'll do that," he said. Then, with a small smile, he added, "And you do the same." Madison grinned, blinking away the tears that threatened to spill. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would change more than just her life. J.D. Vance gave Madison's mother a reassuring nod before stepping away, the painting still tucked under his arm. The moment he turned, murmurs spread through the small crowd that had gathered. People whispered, some pulling out their phones, others nudging each other as if confirming they had just witnessed something extraordinary. But Madison barely noticed. Her fingers still rested on the table, hovering over the fresh gold paint she had used to sign the canvas. The world felt heavier yet lighter at the same time. Her mother exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her chest. "Did that just happen?" Madison's voice was quiet. "I think so." Then, before either of them could process it further, one of the security agents approached. He wasn't holding a phone or speaking into an earpiece like before. Instead, he handed Madison's mother a sleek black card with embossed gold lettering. "The vice president asked me to pass this along," the agent said. "If you need anything at all, call this number. No press, no cameras, just help." Her mother's fingers curled around the card, her lips trembling as she whispered a soft, "Thank you." The agent gave her a small nod before stepping away. Madison let out a slow breath. The weight of everything, the treatment, the uncertainty, the endless hospital stays, had been pressing on her for months. And now, for the first time, it didn't feel quite so crushing. But the moment wasn't over yet. A man standing nearby, dressed in a faded brown jacket, suddenly stepped forward. He had been watching quietly, but now he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few folded bills. He placed them on the table without a word. Then another person stepped up, and another. A woman in running gear fumbled for her phone. "Do you have a Venmo or something? I don't have cash, but I want to help." Madison's mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling onto her cheeks. It was like a dam had broken. The moment people realized they could do something, they did. A young couple bought 2 paintings, even though they admitted they had no space to hang them. A college student left a $20 bill and walked away without taking anything, just shaking his head like he had no words. Madison looked around, overwhelmed. She had spent months fighting this battle, feeling like she had to do it alone. And now people were stepping up beside her. She turned to her mother. "This is real, right?" Her mother laughed through her tears, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's real, baby. It's real." But even as Madison clung to her mother, her heart pounding with disbelief and gratitude, she had no idea just how far this moment was about to reach. Because by the next morning, the entire country would know her name. Madison woke up to the sound of her mother's phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. She groggily rubbed her eyes, her body still sore from yesterday's long hours at the park. The memory of J.D. Vance buying her painting still felt surreal, like a dream she wasn't quite ready to let go of. Her mother groaned as she reached for the phone. Who on earth is calling this early? But the second she looked at the screen, her face changed. "Madison, it's the hospital." Madison sat up instantly, her stomach twisting. "Is something wrong?" Her mother shook her head quickly. No, it's not that. They want to talk to you." Her heart pounded as her mother swiped to answer. "Hello?" Madison couldn't hear the person on the other end, but her mother's brows furrowed in confusion, then lifted in shock. "Wait, what? You're serious?" A pause. "Oh my God." Her mother pressed a hand to her forehead. "Yes, of course. We'll be there." She ended the call, staring at the phone like it might vanish from her hands. "Mom." Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. "What did they say?" Her mother turned to her, blinking rapidly, as if trying to process her own words before saying them out loud. "The hospital just told me someone made an anonymous donation," she said, her voice shaking. "They covered everything, Madison, every single treatment. You don't owe them another dime." Madison's breath hitched. That was him, wasn't it? Her mother didn't have to say it. They both knew. But that was only the beginning. As they sat there in stunned silence, the buzzing started again. But this time, it wasn't just the hospital calling. Her mother's phone vibrated non-stop with texts, emails, and social media notifications. Curious, Madison reached for her own phone, and the moment she unlocked it, she gasped. Her story was everywhere. A local news station had covered what happened at the park, but overnight, it had exploded. National outlets had picked it up. People were sharing videos, retelling the moment J.D. Vance had bought her painting and quietly ensured she got the treatment she needed. And the donations. Madison's hands shook as she opened her fundraising page. The number had skyrocketed. Thousands of people, total strangers, had contributed. Some left messages of encouragement, others simply gave what they could. Tears filled her eyes as she scrolled through the names. Teachers, parents, students, cancer survivors, even kids her own age. People who had never met her but still cared enough to help. Her mother was crying too, holding her phone like it was the most fragile thing in the world. "Madison," she said, her voice trembling, "you don't just have enough for your treatment anymore." She let out a shaky laugh. "You have enough to help other kids too." Madison's chest swelled. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about the pain, the exhaustion, or the uncertainty of what came next. She was thinking about what she could do for others. And for the first time she realized this fight had never been just hers alone. The days that followed felt like a blur. Reporters wanted interviews. Madison's story was shared on national television. Schools reached out, asking if she would visit and talk about her art. Messages flooded in, some from cancer patients who saw themselves in her journey, others from strangers who simply wanted to say they believed in her. But through it all, Madison stayed grounded. She still painted, still set up her little table at Goodale Park. But now things were different. People didn't just stop by to buy her art. They came to talk, to share their own struggles, to remind her that kindness still existed in the world. One afternoon, as she packed up her supplies, her mother received another call. This time, it was from a non-profit organization that worked with children battling cancer. "They want you to help design a program," her mother told her, eyes shining. "An art therapy initiative for kids going through treatment." Madison's heart skipped a beat. All this time, she had been painting to escape her own pain, to find a way to feel normal in a life that had been turned upside down. But now she had the chance to give that same feeling to others. That night, she picked up her brush with a new sense of purpose. J.D. Vance had set something in motion, but it wasn't about money or politics. It was about something bigger, about what happens when one person chooses to see another to step in, to do what they can. She thought back to his words. Sometimes the world gives back to people who refuse to give up. Madison wasn't giving up. She was just getting started. Because sometimes hope doesn't come in grand gestures or headlines. Sometimes it's in a brushstroke, a shared story, a small act of kindness that changes everything. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of compassion and resilience, share it. because you never know who might need to hear it. And if you ever wonder whether a single person can make a difference, Madison is living proof that they can.